If you win the 2020 election, what would you say in your first call with Russian President Vladimir Putin?
It's a fun moment. Well, first I'd say I'm sorry I beat your guy.
Hey, I'm Scott Detrow.
And I'm Juana Summers.
And we just watched the 5th Democratic presidential debate. And the race has really, for the last month or so, really been overshadowed by the impeachment inquiry that's happening in Washington, D.C. So it was kind of fitting to me that the 5th debate takes place on the day where we have the biggest testimony so far, Gordon Sondland's testimony. But we still did have a debate. 10 candidates were on stage, and it started off kind of slow, didn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So as you mentioned, impeachment was the big story of the day, and that is where we started off. I think a lot of us who are watching these debates routinely were expecting this to be a big night with a lot of punches flying between these candidates, particularly folks looking to target folks like Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who in polls in Iowa and New Hampshire has steadily been rising, but we didn't really see that happen, at least not early on.
Yeah, in fact, a couple candidates, Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, Kamala Harris of California, were directly asked about criticisms that they'd made of Buttigieg before, and they shifted their answer and really talked about other things. That changed in the last 20 minutes or so, though.
I think the most recent example of your inexperience in national security and foreign policy came from your recent careless statement about how you as president would be willing to send our troops to Mexico to fight the cartels.
Well, do you seriously think anybody on this stage is proposing invading Mexico?
That's not what I said.
I'm talking about building up.
Notably, they are two of the youngest candidates. They are also two of the only veterans on stage. They talked about their military service and their different approaches to foreign policy. And in particular, Mayor Buttigieg really swung back at her, saying that if her questions are about his experience and his judgment, he would not have sat down with the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad, as she did in January of 17.
In my experience, such as it is, whether you think it counts or not, since it wasn't accumulated in Washington, enough judgment that I would not have sat down with a murderous dictator like that.
And on policy, another interesting thing about tonight is that so far, the previous 4 debates had been all about Medicare for all for almost the first half of the debates. Long chunks of debating health care, going back and forth between Medicare for all and more incremental approaches. We were expecting a little bit of that tonight, especially since last month in October, Elizabeth Warren really was criticized for not having enough detail about her plan, and that's something she spent about the next month answering for. But tonight hardly came up at all, and instead we heard about a lot of policy you usually don't hear as much about in these debates.
Yeah, for me, something I found really interesting was the amount of time this debate spent talking about housing policy. We heard Tom Steyer talk about that at length, Elizabeth Warren talking about redlining. We also heard a number of the candidates, and I especially want to note the male candidates, talking about paid family leave and what they would do. An interesting exchange also between Kamala Harris and Amy Klobuchar over how much family leave they would want to guarantee under their eventual administrations.
And climate change gets more attention than those other topics, but still more time tonight than we've seen before.
For sure.
I think the last thing that we were thinking about and talking about in the newsroom is that, Cory Booker is somebody who had been a little toward the middle of the stage in earlier debates and steadily moving to the side. And he was at the very end of the debate stage tonight, and he was blunt about the fact that he and several other candidates might not be on this stage this time next month.
I have not yet qualified for the December stage and need your help to do that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. These thresholds for the debates for the candidates to appear in terms of their polling and in terms of how much money and individual donors they have to raise, it keeps getting harder. Cory Booker was very absolute and said, I might not be here. I need your help. There are other candidates who are feeling that crunch too. Take Julian Castro, for example. You didn't see him tonight, and he was in that last debate. He wasn't on stage participating on Twitter. This will also be a bind for a candidate like former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick, who just jumped into the race, obviously didn't have enough time to make the qualifying standards for this debate, but could really feel that crunch for the next one. And these debates are obviously important if you want to, again, drive those donors rise in the polls.
And you can catch all of our coverage, including the live blog we did, going through some fact-checking and some analysis as well, on npr.org. I'm Scott Detrow.
I'm Juana Summers.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks.